Sometimes life puts us through paths of humiliation to prepare us for a greater destiny. In that house where I was treated like invisible furniture, nobody knew that beneath this old Southern lady lived a trained soldier. Hello, my dear ones. I'm Dorothy Mae Henderson, but y'all can call me Dot. I'm 62 years old today, and my heart is full of stories to tell from right here in Birmingham, Alabama, where the summer heat sticks to your skin like molasses and family secrets run deeper than the Tennessee River. Before I start this story that changed my life completely, I want to ask you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It's such a joy knowing my stories reach so many different places across this great country of ours. I'm gonna tell y'all today how I went from being treated like a burden to showing everyone that this old gal still has fight left in her, and how 15 years of military training that I kept hidden from my own family finally came in handy when I needed it most. This story begins on a sweltering Sunday afternoon in July 2023, when the smell of my famous cornbread was mixing with tension so thick you could cut it with a butter knife, and the ceiling fan was working overtime trying to push around that thick Alabama air that feels like breathing through wet cotton. I was living in the back room of my daughter Mary Beth's house on Southside Birmingham, in a neighborhood where front porches still matter and everyone knows everyone else's business. For 2 whole years, I'd been biting my tongue, while my son-in-law Billy Ray Crawford treated me like some kind of charity case that had overstayed its welcome. Mary Beth, bless her heart, was working double shifts at UAB Hospital as a registered nurse, and didn't see half of what went on when she wasn't home. She'd leave before dawn and come back after dark, exhausted and trusting that her husband was taking good care of her mama and their 2 children. Billy Ray had this way of making me feel small, like I was just taking up space in what he called his house. Never mind that Mary Beth's name was on every deed, every bill, and every bank account. He'd make little comments about the electric bill being higher because I ran my window unit, or how much groceries cost when there was an extra mouth to feed. The man had been unemployed for 3 months, but somehow it was my Social Security check that was the problem. That particular Sunday, the whole family was gathered around the dinner table in Mary Beth's small dining room. Little Bobby, who's 8 years old and smart as a whip, was telling us about his Little League baseball game where he'd hit his first home run. Savannah, my sweet 6-year-old grandbaby with pigtails that bounced when she talked, was picking at her green beans like they were gonna bite her back. The smell of my cornbread, collard greens, and Mary Beth's fried chicken filled the house with the kind of comfort that makes a family feel like home. I was just enjoying watching my grandchildren when Billy Ray decided to open his mouth and ruin what should have been a peaceful family dinner. Mary Beth, I don't know why we keep pretending your mama can contribute anything to this family, he said, his voice carrying that mean edge I'd grown to know too well. His beady eyes were fixed on me like I was something unpleasant he'd stepped in. She's just sitting there taking up space, deaf as a doornail, and about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. Hell, she can't even hear half of what we're saying anyway. The words hung in the air like smoke from a grease fire. Little Bobby's fork stopped halfway to his mouth, and Savannah's big blue eyes got wide as saucers. Mary Beth tried to smooth things over like she always did, her voice getting that strained quality it took on when she was trying to keep peace in her own home. Billy Ray, please, not in front of the children, she said, but I could see the exhaustion in her face, the way she was too tired to fight another battle. But something inside me snapped that day. Not the angry kind of snap that makes you say things you regret, the cold, calculating kind that I hadn't felt since my army days, when I had to make decisions that could mean life or death. See, what Billy Ray, and even my own precious daughter, didn't know was that for 15 years, from 1978 to 1993, I'd served my country as a sergeant in military intelligence. I'd been trained to read people like books, to gather information like a bloodhound on a scent, and to plan operations that could take down enemies much smarter and more dangerous than some small-town Alabama boy who thought he was hot stuff because he could intimidate an old woman. That night, after everyone had gone to bed and the house was quiet except for the sound of cicadas singing their summer song outside my window, I sat in my little room and made a decision that would change everything. I was done being the helpless old woman who took abuse with a smile. It was time to show Billy Ray Crawford exactly who he'd been messing with for the past 2 years. The next morning dawned hot and humid, typical for Birmingham in late July. I started what I privately called Operation Sweet Tea, named after the drink that's sweeter than it appears, just like I was about to be. I began by doing what I did best in the Army, observing and gathering intelligence on my target. Billy Ray had patterns, routines, and weaknesses, just like any enemy I'd ever studied during my years at Fort Huachuca in Arizona, where I'd learned that information was more powerful than any weapon. Every morning at 7:30 sharp, Billy Ray would take his coffee out to the back porch and make phone calls he thought nobody could hear. The way he hunched over his phone and kept looking around told me these weren't social calls. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he'd drive off in his rusty pickup truck for what he called job interviews. But he never seemed to land any work, and he always came back more agitated than when he left. Every Friday night without fail, he'd lock himself in the spare bedroom with his laptop, and I could hear him getting all nervous and twitchy, sometimes raising his voice at whoever he was talking to online. I started keeping a little notebook, writing down everything in a code I'd learned back at intelligence school. To anyone else, it looked like grocery lists and appointment reminders written in the shaky handwriting of an old woman. But to me, it was an intelligence file on Billy Ray Crawford, and it was growing thicker every day. I noted his moods, his habits, his phone calls, and most importantly, the times when he thought no one was watching or listening. The heat that August was something fierce, but it gave me the perfect excuse to sit on the front porch with a glass of sweet tea and my crocheting, positioned where I could watch everything that happened on our street. Neighbors would wave and stop to chat, thinking I was just a lonely old widow passing time until her daughter came home from work. Mrs. Henderson from next door would bring me tomatoes from her garden, and Mr. Williams across the street would update me on neighborhood gossip. Little did any of them know I was conducting surveillance operations, cataloging every strange car that drove by, every unusual visitor, every detail that might be relevant to understanding what Billy Ray was really up to. That's when I noticed the pattern with the phone calls. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, at exactly 2 in the afternoon, Billy Ray would pace around the backyard, talking to someone in hushed, angry tones. His body language was all wrong. Shoulders tense like a cat ready to fight. His free hand clenched in a fist, constantly looking over his shoulder like he expected someone to sneak up on him. These weren't job hunting calls or casual conversations with friends. These were the kind of calls that meant trouble. One Wednesday afternoon, when the heat was making the air shimmer like water over the pavement, I positioned myself by the kitchen window where I could hear better while pretending to wash dishes. My hearing wasn't nearly as bad as I let everyone believe. Another little military habit I'd kept up, always staying alert to my surroundings. The words I caught made my blood run cold, despite the Alabama heat. Just need more time. The old lady's got money. She won't be around forever anyway. And most chilling of all, nobody's gonna miss her much. That night, I pulled out a lockbox from under my bed that I hadn't opened in 10 years. Inside were my old Army manuals, some equipment I'd kept from my intelligence days, and most importantly, contact information for people who owed me favors from my service days. If Billy Ray wanted to play games with my family's security, he was about to learn that this old soldier wasn't done fighting, and that some battles require more than just harsh words and hurt feelings. The next phase of my operation began with a phone call to Tommy Joe Williams. a young man I'd served with who was now a licensed private investigator down in Mobile. Dot Henderson, I said when he answered, using the voice I'd reserved for giving orders to subordinates who needed to understand the gravity of a situation. Yes, ma'am, Sergeant Henderson, Tommy Joe replied, and I could hear the immediate respect in his voice that came from shared service and shared understanding of what it meant to serve your country. What do you need? I need everything you can find on a Billy Ray Crawford, born in Birmingham about 32 years ago, married to my daughter Mary Beth. I need financial records, employment history, criminal background, associates, debts, and anything else that might explain why a grown man spends his days making mysterious phone calls instead of looking for honest work. And Tommy Joe, I need it yesterday, and I need it kept between us until I say otherwise. While I waited for Tommy Joe's report, I started the next phase of my operation, making Billy Ray comfortable enough to reveal his true intentions. This required me to play a role I'd perfected over the past 2 years. The confused, dependent old woman who needed help with everything. I began asking him to help me with things I could easily do myself, like reading the small print on medicine bottles or understanding my bank statements. I made him think he was gaining my trust while I was really gaining access to his routines, his habits, and most importantly, his guard. The breakthrough came on a Friday night when Billy Ray thought everyone was asleep. Mary Beth had worked a 16-hour shift and was dead to the world, and the children were staying overnight at their cousin's house. I heard Billy Ray on the phone in the kitchen around midnight, and this time, I was ready with a little listening device I'd bought online. Technology had come a long way since my Army days, but the principles of gathering intelligence remained exactly the same. Look, I'm telling you, the old bat's got at least 50,000 in savings, Billy Ray was saying, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who thought he was smarter than everyone around him. She's already talking about giving me power of attorney to help with her finances. She trusts me now, thinks I'm looking out for her best interests. Once I got that paperwork signed, we can clean her out and she'll never know what hit her. By the time anyone figures out what happened, the money'll be long gone. My hands shook as I listened to him plan to steal everything I'd worked for, everything I'd saved over decades of careful living to leave to my grandchildren. But it was the next part of the conversation that really made my military training kick into full gear. The part that transformed this from a family problem into a genuine threat assessment. Hell, at her age, how much longer can she last anyway? Billy Ray continued, and I could hear him opening a beer, getting more comfortable with his criminal planning. Natural causes happen all the time to old folks her age. Little bit of stress. Maybe she forgets to take her heart medicine. Has a fall down those back steps. Accidents happen, you know. And once she's out of the picture, Mary Beth inherits everything. And what's Mary Beth's becomes mine eventually. That's when I knew Billy Ray Crawford wasn't just a lazy con man looking for easy money. He was a genuine threat to my family. And in my experience, threats needed to be eliminated with precision, purpose, and the kind of strategic thinking that had kept me and my fellow soldiers alive during some very dangerous missions overseas. Tommy Joe's report arrived by secure email 3 days later, and it painted a picture that was worse than I'd imagined. Billy Ray had a gambling problem that went back to his high school days, when he'd been caught running illegal poker games in the school parking lot. He'd been fired from his last 4 jobs for various forms of theft. Nothing big enough to warrant prosecution, but a clear pattern of taking what didn't belong to him. He'd taken out multiple payday loans using Mary Beth's information and forged her signature, putting her credit and financial security at risk. But worst of all, he owed significant money to some very unsavory characters who had reputations for collecting debts through intimidation, property damage, and when necessary, physical violence. The report included photos, addresses, financial records, and even some recorded conversations that Tommy Joe had managed to obtain through his network of contacts in law enforcement and private security. Billy Ray wasn't just planning to rob me. He was desperate, cornered like a dangerous animal, and desperate people make unpredictable decisions that put innocent families at risk. I spent that entire night studying the report like it was a mission briefing for a dangerous operation in enemy territory. Billy Ray wasn't just planning to steal from an old woman. He was planning to eliminate a perceived obstacle to his financial security, and he was willing to make it look like an accident to avoid consequences. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about survival, about protecting my daughter and grandchildren from a man who had revealed himself to be capable of planning my death as casually as he might plan a trip to the grocery store. The next morning, I started Phase 3 of Operation Sweet Tea, psychological warfare designed to make my target nervous, sloppy, and prone to making mistakes that would reveal even more about his intentions and capabilities. I began leaving little signs that I was onto him, moving things he'd searched through in my room, asking innocent questions about his job hunting that contained just enough specific information to make him wonder how much I really knew, mentioning conversations I supposedly shouldn't have overheard because I was too deaf to understand what was being said. Nothing obvious enough that he could confront me about it directly, but enough to make him paranoid and start second-guessing whether the helpless old woman act was as genuine as he'd believed. Fear makes people stupid, and stupid people reveal their secrets when they think they're being clever. Sure enough, Billy Ray started making the kind of mistakes that would have gotten him killed in a real military operation. He got careless with his phone calls, sometimes forgetting to go outside or lower his voice. He left his laptop unlocked when he went to the bathroom. He started drinking more beer in the evenings, and alcohol has a way of loosening tongues and lowering inhibitions in ways that reveal a person's true character. It was during one of his beer-fueled evenings that I discovered the full extent of his betrayal of my daughter and our family. Using techniques I'd learned for accessing enemy communications, I was able to review his text messages, emails, and social media accounts. What I found there made my blood run colder than a Birmingham winter morning. Billy Ray had been telling everyone he knew, including some very dangerous people, that he was married to a wealthy woman whose mother had significant savings and property. He'd convinced loan sharks and gamblers that he had access to family money that would cover his debts, and when they started pressuring him for payment, he'd assured them that his rich old mother-in-law would be taking care of the problem soon. But the most chilling discovery came when I found a conversation thread on his phone where he'd been asking someone about making old people have accidents that look natural. The responses included detailed discussions about medications that could cause heart attacks, ways to cause falls that would look accidental, and even suggestions about creating burglary gone wrong scenarios that would eliminate witnesses while providing cover for theft. He'd been using my reputation in the community and Mary Beth's excellent credit to borrow money from multiple sources with no intention of paying any of it back. My grandbabies were living in the same house with a man who was not only planning to rob us blind, but was actively researching ways to murder me and make it look like natural causes or random crime. This had moved far beyond family drama into the realm of genuine danger, and it was time for Dorothy Mae Henderson, retired Army sergeant, to handle this threat the way she'd been trained to handle threats to American lives and security. That's when I decided it was time for the final phase of the operation, decisive action that would end Billy Ray Crawford's threat to my family once and for all. I spent the next week preparing for what military strategists call mission-critical engagement. This wasn't going to be a confrontation driven by emotion or family drama. This was going to be a carefully planned operation designed to neutralize a threat, gather evidence of criminal activity, and ensure the long-term security of my family unit. I gathered every piece of evidence I'd collected over the past 3 months, organized it like a court-martial briefing with exhibits, timelines, and supporting documentation. I prepared backup plans for various scenarios, including the possibility that Billy Ray might become violent when cornered, or that he might try to turn the family against me by claiming I was suffering from dementia or paranoid delusions. Most importantly, I reached out to my network of contacts from my military days, people who understood the difference between family squabbles and genuine security threats, people who had the resources and authority to ensure that justice would be served, regardless of what happened during the confrontation. The setup was perfect for what I had in mind. A Sunday dinner just like the one where this whole nightmare had started 3 months earlier. Mary Beth was scheduled to work a double shift at the hospital, which meant it would be just me, Billy Ray, and the children in the house. I'd called Tommy Joe and asked him to be ready with backup documentation and to have certain authorities on standby in case the situation escalated beyond what I could handle alone. I'd also prepared a little surprise that would show Billy Ray exactly who he'd been underestimating for the past 2 years. When Billy Ray started his usual routine of insulting me in front of little Bobby and Savannah, calling me names and making comments about how I was a burden on the family, I let him dig his hole, good and deep. I sat there nodding and looking confused, playing the helpless old woman role one last time, while he revealed his true character to his own children. Then, when he called me a worthless old burden who'd be better off dead, for what I knew would be the last time, I stood up from my chair, walked calmly to the kitchen, and came back with a folder full of everything I'd discovered about his lies, his debts, his criminal plans, and his threats against my life. Billy Ray Crawford, I said in the voice I'd used to address insubordinate soldiers who needed to understand that their commanding officer was done playing games. You have exactly 1 chance to sit down, shut your mouth, and listen very carefully to what I have to say. And children, why don't y'all go play in the backyard for a few minutes while Grandmama has a grown-up conversation with your daddy? The look on Billy Ray's face when he realized that the deaf old woman had been running a professional-grade intelligence operation on him for 3 months was worth every sleepless night I'd spent planning this moment. His face went white as Alabama cotton in a field. His hands started shaking like leaves in a windstorm, and for the first time since I'd known him, Billy Ray Crawford had absolutely nothing to say. I laid out every piece of evidence like I was presenting a case to a military tribunal. The phone recordings where he planned to steal my savings and forge power of attorney documents. The loan documents he'd created using Mary Beth's personal information without her knowledge or consent. The text messages where he'd discussed ways to make my death look accidental. The photographs Tommy Joe had taken of him, meeting with known criminals who specialized in collecting gambling debts through violence and intimidation. And finally, the most damning evidence of all, screenshots of his internet searches for information about elderly heart attacks, home accidents, and burglary statistics in Birmingham neighborhoods. Now, I said, settling back in my chair while Billy Ray sat there, looking like he'd seen a ghost rise up from Confederate soil. We're gonna discuss the terms of your unconditional surrender, and you're gonna listen real careful because this is the only deal you're gonna get. The negotiation didn't take long because Billy Ray quickly realized he had no cards to play in this particular game. He was going to confess everything to Mary Beth when she came home from work, with me sitting right there to make sure he didn't leave out any important details. He was going to pay back every penny he'd stolen or borrowed fraudulently, even if it meant working 3 jobs and living in his truck. He was going to voluntarily enter a treatment program for his gambling addiction, and he was going to provide documentation that he'd completed the program successfully. Most importantly, He was going to sign away all parental rights to little Bobby and Savannah, because no grandchild of mine was growing up with a man who'd threatened their grandmother's life and plotted to steal their inheritance. And finally, Billy Ray Crawford was going to leave Birmingham, Alabama, and never contact our family again. He could start over somewhere else, maybe find an honest way to make a living. But he was done being a threat to the people I loved. Billy Ray tried to bluster and threaten, talking about how no one would believe a crazy old woman over him, how he'd tell everyone I was suffering from dementia and making up stories. But I pulled out one final piece of evidence that shut him up quicker than a June bug in a chicken coop. A recording of him discussing specific plans to make my death look accidental, complete with research he'd done about dosages and timing. When he realized I had enough evidence to send him to prison for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and elder abuse, he folded faster than a house of cards in a tornado. The hardest part of this whole operation was telling Mary Beth everything when she came home from her 16-hour shift at UAB Hospital, watching my daughter's heart break as she realized the man she'd married and trusted with her children was a criminal who'd threatened her mother's life, was harder than any enemy fire I'd ever faced during my military service. She sat at that kitchen table crying tears that seemed to come from the deepest part of her soul, asking how she could have been so blind, how she could have brought such danger into her own home. But Mary Beth Henderson didn't raise any weak daughters, and Mary Beth Henderson Crawford didn't stay married to any man who'd threaten her family. By the time the sun came up the next morning, she'd made her decision with the kind of strength that runs in the women of our family, like Alabama clay, runs through Birmingham soil. Within a week, Billy Ray was gone from our lives forever. He signed every paper we put in front of him, confessed to every lie he'd told, returned what money he hadn't already lost to gambling, and left town with nothing but a suitcase and a bus ticket to somewhere far away from Alabama. The house felt different without his negative energy poisoning the air we breathed. Lighter, safer, full of love and hope instead of fear and resentment. The children adjusted to their new reality better than anyone expected. Little Bobby told me he'd never liked how his daddy talked to me, and that he was glad he didn't have to pretend to respect a man who was mean to his grandmama. Savannah said she felt safer knowing it was just us girls and her big brother protecting the house. Smart children, those two. They inherited their intelligence and their moral compass from their grandmother's side of the family. As for me, I moved out of that cramped back bedroom and into the master suite where I belonged as the matriarch of this family. The walls were soon covered with photographs from my army days, my commendations and service medals, and pictures of the strong women our family had always produced. I wasn't hiding who I was anymore, wasn't pretending to be helpless, when I was actually stronger and more capable than most people half my age. Mary Beth went back to school to become a nurse practitioner, knowing she had built-in childcare from a grandmother who was much tougher than anyone had given her credit for. The house became full of laughter again, homework help sessions around the kitchen table, and the kind of Sunday dinners where everyone felt safe to be themselves without walking on eggshells around a volatile, dangerous man. Sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and I'm sitting on the front porch, watching the fireflies dance in the summer air, I wonder if I was too hard on Billy Ray Crawford. Maybe I could have handled things differently. Maybe I could have tried to get him help before it came to complete destruction of his relationship with his children. But then I remember that recording where he talked about making my death look accidental, where he researched ways to murder an old woman for her Social Security money. And I know I did exactly what any good soldier does when faced with a threat to innocent lives. I protected my unit by neutralizing the danger with decisive action. The last I heard through Tommy Joe's contacts, Billy Ray was living in a halfway house somewhere in Mississippi, still dealing with the psychological consequences of underestimating a woman who'd spent 15 years serving her country in military intelligence. He developed what the doctors called severe paranoid anxiety disorder, always looking over his shoulder, always worried that someone was watching him, documenting his actions, planning their next move against him. Funny how guilt and fear can eat at a man's mind when he realizes he's been outmaneuvered by someone he thought was too old and weak to fight back. But Billy Ray Crawford's mental health isn't my concern anymore, and it hasn't been since the day he left Birmingham with his tail between his legs. My concern now is teaching little Bobby how to throw a proper curveball and helping him understand that real men don't threaten women or steal from their families. My concern is helping Savannah with her reading and making sure she grows up knowing that women in our family are strong, smart, and capable of protecting themselves and the people they love. My concern is making sure Mary Beth knows she's got backup whenever life gets tough, that she's never alone as long as her mama's still breathing. Most importantly, my concern is being the kind of grandmother who protects her family with wisdom, strength, and when necessary, the deployment of skills that most people don't know she possesses, because the truth that Billy Ray Crawford learned the hard way is that age is just a number, and underestimating people based on how they look or how old they appear to be is a mistake that can cost you everything you think you have. I may be 62 years old today, but I'm still the same woman who served her country with honor and distinction during some challenging times in our nation's history. I'm still the same woman who can outthink, outplan, and outmaneuver anyone who threatens the people I love. And if anyone else ever makes the mistake of thinking this old Southern lady is just some helpless granny taking up space in someone else's house, well, they're welcome to find out just how wrong they can be. The best part about this whole experience is that it reminded me who I really am underneath all those years of being just somebody's mama and somebody's grandmama. I'm Dorothy Mae Henderson, United States Army veteran, and that's something no one can ever take away from me, no matter how old I get or how many people try to make me feel invisible. And that, my dear ones, is how an old soldier handled a family crisis with the same precision and determination she once used to serve her country. Sometimes the most important battles we fight aren't on foreign soil. They're right there in our own homes, protecting the people who matter most. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end of this long story. I hope it reminded you that we should never underestimate the wisdom, strength, and capabilities that come with life experience. If you enjoyed hearing about how this old Alabama grandmother handled her dangerous son-in-law, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. It truly helps us reach more people who might need to hear stories like this one. Every day we bring you new tales about real life, family struggles, and the incredible strength people find when they need it most. So please explore our channel and find the stories that speak to your heart. And I especially want to hear from you in the comments. What did you think of my military background revelation? Did this story remind you of anyone in your own family who might be stronger than they appear? Tell us where you're watching from and share your thoughts. We'll see you tomorrow with another incredible true story that will surprise and inspire you.